Hello everybody, it's Danny back from Deep South Homestead with our porch time today. Getting ready for some cool weather coming, guys. They talking about supposed to be really cool by the weekend, so we'll see. We'll see how it goes. We've got a little bit of rain, not much, got about an inch. That wasn't a whole lot, but we were blessed to have it. It was a slow, steady rain for a whole half a day, you know. It turned out really well, and we feel blessed to have that. I know a lot of y'all are wanting some rain, and most of the country is going to be getting some. There's a few places that might not, but some of y'all are going to get some snow and some severe weather. So it is what it is, guys. I hope and pray that everyone is doing well with the things that's going on in our nation right now. Now, there are several things that I'm talking about. One is the shutdown. I'm shooting this on Sunday, so if it's corrected before this comes out on Tuesday, then praise the Lord. But if not, then we will have a lot of people that's going to be facing some rough waters ahead. And I hate that, because it's like they're acting like a bunch of teenagers up there, because one of them wants their way, the other wants their way, and I'm not doing this unless I can get this, and it's just like a bunch of spoiled brats. And with me saying that, plus we're looking at the situation in Venezuela, you know, that's a really ticking time bomb there. But you know, with that, I got to thinking back, looking back at our last couple of porch times, where we talked about a simpler way of life, and is it really possible, and saying that, and I've been guilty of this my whole life, saying that I was born out of season. You know, I'm in the wrong time of history, it seems like, and a lot of y'all has said the same exact thing in the comments and emails and different things. Like, man, Danny, you really touched home on that particular one. You know, it really you nailed me with that one, or you know, this and that. And that's never my intent to nail anybody or anything like that, because like I've told you, most of the time I'm talking to myself, because I'm dealing with these things just like you guys are. I mean, I'm human just like anybody else. I put my pants on one leg at a time. I'm no different than nobody else is. And I'm probably no more educated than anybody else is. But I want to touch on that a little bit today, because it seems like it's one thing that's on everybody's mind. Is it possible that we can actually live a simpler life? And if so, how is it possible to do that? And am I really born out of time? Well, I don't actually think anybody's born out of time, because God has a specific plan and a specific purpose for every person that has ever been born. And it has been my experience in life that the things that I really wanted out of my life when I was a young man most of them did not come to fruition. And it was not until later in my life that the Lord revealed unto me why. And now I understand. So we have to always understand, God has it in our best interest. He's devised a plan for our life, and that plan is to be good for us and to bring good to us and for us to be prosperous. because he wants nothing but good for us. But in return, he wants total obedience to him, which is not a lot to ask in return for a blessed life. Now, guys, I'm just going to I'm just being as hard-shelled honest as I know how to be with y'all today. There's lots of times I'm just not happy. You know, I'm not. I'm not happy with the situation that everything's in today. Even though I can't change it. I know I can't change it. I can pray. I can pray for the leaders of this country. I can pray for the situations that's going on in the world. But I also know that the Lord has a particular time clock, and that time clock is ticking, and no matter what I pray, God's will be done. No matter how sorrowful I am, you know, I've spent the biggest portion of my life educating myself on particular matters. Now, Mr. Tim was over here, it's been a couple of weeks back, I think. He and I had probably one of the most moving conversations I think we've ever had. And it really wasn't intended to be that way. It just happened, and it was very brief. And it has never left my mind. The Spirit has been tugging at me about that conversation Tim and I had ever since then. Because it held the key to some of the things that we've been experiencing here in the past, and also will be in the future. And a lot of y'all have expressed interest in this conversation that we've had, even though you didn't know it. But it's probably the answer to a lot of people's questions. Now, as Tim and I sat and talked, you know, Tim's not from down here. Tim is from the Pacific Northwest. Grew up in a total different lifestyle than I grew up down here. But yet, we share a lot of similarities in some areas. We were sitting on my porch and talking about the school system that's going on around us today, and we talked about how that when he and I were younger, Tim's considerably younger than I am, but he still went through in school some of the things that I experienced in school. We were talking about how that once you got into high school and you got to be in the 9th grade, you were a freshman. We talked about some of the elective classes that you had to have. I mean, everybody was required to take at least a PE class. You had to have some kind of physical education. I mean, back then, it was mandatory that you exercised and got some physical education. You know, your body, you had to physically work with your body. And then as we moved on to the 10th grade, we had certain things we had to take. You know, you had to have a math, you had to have an English, and social studies, and on and on. But it wasn't until we got to the 11th and 12th grade that this is where we're going to start. This is where we've seen the changes that's happened. Now, no longer was it required once you was in the 11th and 12th grade to take a physical education course or anything like that. You didn't have to have study hall or anything. But it was mandatory that you took if you were a lady, it was mandatory that you took some kind of home economics type class where you could learn housekeeping, how to cook, how to clean, how to raise a family, how to be a mother, how to do things that is needed on the female side of a household, according to the way we were raised back then. And then if you was a guy, and guys and girls could go either way on this, so they didn't discriminate in any kind of way, because I actually had girls in some of my classes as a guy, especially in my automotive class. I had girls in my automotive class that I took. But guys could take, you had several different shop classes. You could take metal shop classes. You could take wood shop classes. I mean, you could take carpentry skill, classes. There's lots of different classes that a person could take. Agricultural type classes. You could take all this stuff, and like me, you could leave school after half a day and go to college, which is what I did in 11th grade, and studied automotive mechanics at a junior college for a year. And these were things that was expected. And when I got to the 12th grade, I still didn't have to go to school half a day if I didn't want to, because I had all my credits. Because I took back-to-back classes. I didn't really take any study halls or anything like that that didn't count as a credit. I backed up my credits a lot. And I took a co-op class for probably 30 minutes to an hour, and then the rest of the day I left school, went to work the rest of the day. I worked for a Chevrolet company, being a mechanic and then later a body man for them. And in the co-op class, we were taught how to balance checkbooks. We were taught how to do business, how to conduct ourselves if we were sitting behind the desk and a client comes in. We were taught all these skills that you need to be able to do these things. Well, fast forward from then. Now, Tim said he went through the same exact thing up in the Pacific Northwest. He said these things were required of you. Now, when you graduated from high school back in the 60s or 70s, most of the guys that graduated then could build something if they needed to. They knew how to work on equipment, whether it's a lawnmower, a tractor, a truck, or a car, or anything like that. Most guys knew how to do that kind of stuff because they had taken some courses in school. It was required of you. A young man, if he was ready to get married right out of school. Now, I waited a year out of school. I told my daddy, I said, I'm not going to get married right out of school. I'm going to wait a year. And I told him, I says, if the service and special forces if I can get into that, then that's what I'll do. And I'll make a career out of it. And any of you who's ever followed I have a documentary done on me, followed my story, then you'll know that I was involved in a horrific accident that I was not supposed to even live in, which prevented me from following those dreams. And I had to alter my lifestyle, and basically stayed angry for years because I didn't get to do the things that I wanted to do. Well, when a man got out of school back then and he was wanting to get married, most guys had family that had land, because lots of people back in the 60s and the 70s, the families owned property. If your parents were wise and looked to the future for their children, they bought property. My daddy owned 20-something acres, and the young lady that I married, her father owned 100-something acres. Everybody owned pieces of property. And they would tell the young boy or young lady, if they were going to be getting married, that we'll give you an acre to build you a little house on. And most built what's called starter homes. And usually the guy could build his own home. It might not have been anything fancy, but he could build his house, And if he didn't build it, like me, I had someone come in and frame my first house up and completely finish the outside wire and plumb it, and I came in and finished the inside of it. So while we lived in a house trailer, and then turned around and sold the house trailer, and lived in a house. And I've always lived in a house ever since. Other than for a short period of time, I went through a divorce, and I lived in a house trailer for a few months while I built me another new home. But other than that, most guys knew how to be a husband and fix something if it broke down. They could put up fences. They could plant a garden. They could raise animals. They could build a house, or at least work on a house like I did to start with. I didn't know how to build one, but I knew how to finish one because I'd helped build churches and stuff like that up to that point. And the young ladies come right out of high school knowing how to already do wife things, in the house. They knew how to take care of children because most of them had to babysit, and that's where they earned money while they were in high school. They babysat and knew how to take care of children, and they knew how to cook and clean and sew and balance checkbooks, and all the young ladies knew how to do that stuff back then. They were very intelligent. As a matter of fact, back then it was often said that the women were a few years ahead of the guys as far as intelligence was concerned because they were more level-headed and settled down in their late teens than the guys were. Because guys tended to want to be rabble-rousers, if you want to use that term for a little bit. But as Tim and I sat and talked about these things, we realized that that's what happened to our society today. Most kids getting out of high school today are interested in one thing only, and that's going to college. Now, back then, people encouraged college, but you weren't drove to go to college. In other words, if you wanted to go and your family had the money, then you could go to college, and if not, you could work and pay your way through college, or you could get a grant if your grades were good enough to go to college. But that's where it all began, because you see there is actually a verse in the Bible. Now this verse is a very controversial verse. It gets taken a lot of different ways, but it's Ecclesiastes, let me get it right, Ecclesiastes chapter 11, I think it's verse 2, right in that area right there, where it talks about, I use the phrase, not putting all your eggs in one basket. In other words, you diversify yourself in life so that you don't ever know what life's going to throw at you. And you need to be well versed in many areas rather than just focusing on one thing for a career. And that's where it all began. Is in school, they began to say, look, what do you want to be in life? Well, you need to focus on a career, and you need to focus on doing one thing, and that is not scriptural. The Bible says we need to diversify ourselves. We need to learn, and my daddy told me, he said, son, he said, I'll send you to diesel college if you want to go. He said, and I don't mind paying for it because you are really good at what you do, and I think you would excel at it. But if you don't want to, I'm not going to make you go. And I told him, I said, Dad, and I knew about the verse in Ecclesiastes 11 there. I told him, I said, Dad, the Bible really says I need to diversify myself. And I need to learn as many things in as many different areas as I can. And I'd rather not spend my life focusing on being just a diesel mechanic. And he said, well, that's very wise, son. And never mentioned anything to me again. Never forced me or tried to tell me I need to do this or I need to do that. I did go to school to be an automotive mechanic. I learned how to mechanic at a young age. At the age of 12, I was at Mississippi State University giving a demonstration speech on how to rebuild small engines to 1,000 people through the 4-H. And through the 4-H, I learned how to, I had 200 chickens at one time. Learned how to handle agricultural meat birds and chickens and stuff like that. I got all kinds of certificates in petroleum power while I was in the 4-H, and I was able to increase my knowledge in those areas. And then I not only, like I said, I went to school to be a mechanic, and while I was working for the Chevrolet place, they needed a man down in the body department and was looking for somebody, and I told him, I said, look, I love fixing things. I would love to learn how to do body work. So I went down under the supervision of a guy who's one of my best friends now. He trained and taught me how to do body work, fix bends and fenders and, you know, taking dents out of stuff, repainting. I painted, and for years after that, I painted cars on the side and trucks and stuff like that for people in my dad's shop. Then I went on from that, you know, to going into, my dad owned a timber business, and I went into the timber business for about 15 years and worked side by side with him, and which was a great experience, being able to work with my father all those years. He and I developed a very close relationship through those times, and my mechanicking skills really paid off a lot during those years of working with him, as far as being able to work on equipment, chainsaws, you know, all kinds of stuff like that, knowing how to do hydraulics and these types of things, and operating all types of heavy equipment, driving 18-wheelers, you know, hauling logs, different things to this nature. I was able to diversify myself into a lot of areas, and I married a young lady whose father owned a large sheet metal business where they did formed and fabricated ductwork for air conditioning systems in commercial and residential, and I was able to get involved in that, learn about air conditioning and everything. And the whole time not knowing that God himself was leading me in a particular direction, I took welding while I was in agricultural classes in high school, so I knew how to weld, and I was able to weld for some companies doing duct shafts up high rises and things like that. And I loved learning new things, you know. And then I opened up I saw the need after hurricanes, because there were stumps everywhere. I opened up a stump grinding business. I owned that for quite a few years, going around grinding out people's stumps and having that taken care of. And then I opened up some construction companies, and I owned construction companies. I learned how to build cabinets. You know, I learned how to do plumbing. I still have all my licenses in those areas. Me and Wanda don't let those lapse. We still, even though I don't do it anymore for anybody, I still get my license, because a person, you just don't ever know what might happen in life. And so like Ecclesiastes 11:2 says there, we need to diversify ourselves. And the problem with our people today, especially our children, is that they focused on one thing and one thing only. And then when it comes time for them to get out of school and they don't have a home, well, the families, most of them have not bought up any land or have not accumulated any land of any kind, so they have nothing to leave the child. So the child comes out of school, he's deep in debt because he's had to finance his way through school to get a particular degree, which is a plan by the government to get you in debt. And when he comes out, he's already so deep in debt, he can't really afford to buy anything or do anything, because he's in debt day one, and you don't even have a job yet. And then if he tries to get a home, because most of them now can't build a home, they don't know anything about that, they don't know anything about working on a vehicle or anything like that anymore. Our young men have come out of school not being educated men in life. And I learned this very quickly with a rabbi friend of mine. His son was failing in school, and he said, my son is a very intelligent guy, but he's not grasping what's going on in school. So his wife pulled him out of public school, and they began to, and she wasn't a great teacher or nothing like that, but she knew how to teach him how to learn. And him and her, the rabbi and his wife, began to teach that child how to learn. And within a couple of years, he already had a scholarship to West Point because he was so highly educated. He taught himself Hebrew, and then he turned around and was teaching others Hebrew, but he was still a teenager. So I mean, our school systems has failed us in many, many areas, and it's evident by the people who are coming out of these schools today. Most of our young ladies coming out of school today are more career-oriented than they are family-oriented. And that was a plan hatched out by the government to take the children out of the home and put them into daycare systems where they could educate them themselves rather than you educating them with the Lord at home, thus bringing about the homeschooling movement, which has been a great movement. And guys, this is something that has just been heavy on my heart. You know, I mean, I don't really feel like I fit in anywhere. I'm just being honest. You know, I just really don't feel like I fit in anywhere. Occasionally, I'll run into people like Chris and Jennifer, his wife, or Tim and Heidi. People like that I can sit down with and I can talk to them and we can fellowship, and it feels like we're on the same page about what's going on in the world today. Most people, you try to talk to them about what's happening and about preparing and about being set up to get out of debt and not be burdened down by the world's cares and all this kind of stuff, and they look at you like you're a nut. And it's because they've been educated and dumbed down by the system. And most young people today are very bright. It's that the system has gotten a hold of them, and they come out of school deep in debt. The parents don't own any land to give them anything to help them get started, so they have to go even deeper in debt to be able to buy a home, and most of them then have to just get a lot and rent in town or rent, which is, oh my gosh, is the worst thing in the world you could ever do. And they get stuck in this rut, and they're there for the rest of their lives, and they struggle their whole life, because every time something breaks in the house, they have to bring someone in who's a specialist, like a plumber or an electrician, because the guy himself doesn't know how to fix it anymore. We've got friends that walk that road, you know, and some of them are my age, and it's sad. It's sad to see that happen. But today, guys, I just wanted to, I don't know if y'all feel the way I do, but I'm trying to exist and live a simpler life in a world that's nothing but technology, and I don't like technology. I mean, I know I'm sitting here talking to you guys over the internet and everything, and I do understand it. I know all about the X's and the O's and the Internet of Things and AI, and I know how all this stuff works, and because I've educated myself in a lot of it. I don't like it. I like the simpler way of life, and it really, what drew me to understand that's what was going on is the reason I wasn't feeling well for a long period of time in my life, was that I was drawn to older equipment. I was drawn to things like grist mills and hammer mills and the old Cub tractors and all the old equipment that goes with them and things to that nature. And I kept asking myself, why am I drawn to this stuff? It's not that it's more efficient, because it's really not more efficient. It's a lot harder work to put it all together and make it work. But guys, the end results is so much better. When you plow a garden with one of the old farm tractors and look at what it looks like after you finish it with that farm tractor, and if you used to take a new modern tractor and do it, it looks like crap. I mean, the simplicity of those tractors just brings a calming peace over you when you're using that kind of stuff. And there's something about creating your own feed for your animals, growing your own feed for your animals, and this type of stuff that just brings a peace that I can't explain. And when I realized why I was drawn to these particular types of things in life, I understood then why I was the way I was. I don't like modern stuff. I prefer the older things in life. And there's some of you guys that may feel exactly the same way as I do. You feel like you just really don't fit anywhere. I don't care if I ever go anywhere. I'm just being honest with you. I am just as content right here on my 40-something acres as I can be. If I could never have to leave here, I would be happy. You know, it's very difficult in the world that we live in today, because we have to have, we have to have fuel to operate some of our equipment. I don't have draft horses and things of that nature. I'm in my mid-60s. I'm a little bit too old to be jumping into anything like that anymore. But in my younger years, I really desired it. I just couldn't figure out how to make it happen. And it wasn't until I become part of a Dave Ramsey program and learned the financial techniques of that program and was able to get myself out of debt rather quickly. And it wasn't easy, guys. I'm just being honest with you. It was not easy. I did without so much stuff for so many years. I was made fun of by my family and by other people that were my friends. They were all heading out on the weekends, going to the movies, going out to eat and doing all these kind of things and saying, "Man, come on, go with us." And I'm like, "I can't, man. I gotta pay this note, and they're like, "Oh, come on, man." I said, they said, you paid the note, you just want to pay extra on it. I'm like, yeah, I want to pay extra on it because I want to get out of debt. Well, today, I'm the one out of debt, and they're still paying on those notes. They're still in bondage, and I'm not. It was very hard. I'm just being honest with you. It was very, very hard. I took a lot of ridicule by not going and doing things with my wife and all that during that time, and making us just stay at home and just live off the land, basically. And as Dave would say, rice and beans and rice. I didn't go see family. There was a period I went 3 to 4 years. I didn't even go see my mama and daddy because I just didn't want to spend the money on gas. And my father understood. He said, "Son," he says, "if you can," because my dad was out of debt in the latter part of his life. Once he sold all his equipment, got out from under the businesses that he was under, he said, "Son, I totally understand. Get yourself out of debt." He said, "We got heaven to talk and to spend time together. We ain't worried about this world right here." And I appreciated my father for that, for encouraging me to do that. And maybe some of you guys are in that same boat right now about wanting to live a simpler life, and you're trying to figure out how to make it happen. I actually had to sell everything I had at one point. Now, I lost everything I had 2 times in my life because I was involved in accidents and I couldn't work. But the Lord blessed me and I was able to purchase stuff again. But sometimes we have to take the hard road. I had a nice farm, lots of pecan trees, large barn, new home, everything a person would want, cattle, ponds, all that kind of stuff. But I owed a house note. On that house, I told you, I had someone frame up for me and build, and I finished the inside of it. I had a 25-year note on that house. And I had paid on it for, I think it was 5 years, and struggling. I was struggling to keep those notes up. And I sit down one day and I told my wife, I said, "I don't know if I want to do this the rest of my life. I don't know if this land and this property and this home don't mean that much to me. I'm having to bust my tail from daylight to dark, 16 hours a day, to keep the notes up on everything." I told her, I said, "It's not worth it." And she said, "Well, what are we going to do?" I said, "We're going to pray first that God will show us a piece of property and we're going to sell." And she says, well, we won't have nothing to live in. I said, "Well, I'll build us a house." And And guys, it took 2 years to find the piece of property. And the Lord opened the door. We was able to sell that farm, and I had enough money left over off of that land. I bought the property. I bought 10 acres, and I paid cash for it. And because of my connections with the lumber industry, I had enough money to take one of our 18-wheelers and a 40-foot lowboy to a mill, and I was able to buy enough material to black in a 2-story home for me and my family. And I was able to build that house. I mainly did it on the weekends after work. I got where I was only working just so many hours a day, and then I would quit, and I would come and I'd work on the evenings till dark, and on the weekends and holidays, and I did that for about 6 months. And I told my wife one day, I said, I can't keep doing this. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, I've got the house blacked in, but it's just sitting there. We're not moving with it. And she said, well, what are you going to do? I told her, I says, can you get a job and let me quit mine so I can finish this house where we can get in it, or at least get it where we can move into it, because we were renting at the time and the rent was killing us. So she got a job and I quit my job, and it took me 3 more months to get that house where we could move into it. And if you ask my daughter Jennifer, who's on our live streams, she'll tell you that house was nowhere near complete. When you walked into it, the outside was finished, but the inside had no insulation in it. It had the wiring, the plumbing, and you could see through all the walls in the house because it was just studs. You know, and we moved into it in the middle of February in 20-something degree weather. You know, and like froze to death, but we all learned. You know, that's what life was like. And that's how we got ahead. And today, the world that we live in, there's so many codes and permits and regulations that binds people down today. They can't do that. Now, there's still places in the country where you can do that. But a lot of places you can't anymore because the government has stepped in and tried to put a loop around people's neck and make it tight. And then again, there's enough people, people just won't, they're not willing to sacrifice today. So that's the point I'm trying to make today. Is I know Porch Time's kind of long today, guys, but I'm trying to tell you, living a simpler life is possible, but with it comes a lot of hard work. You know, there's a scripture, and I can't recall right where it's at in the Bible right now. There's a scripture that talks about the rest of a working man is sweet. You know, and the Lord expects us to work, and He expects us to work hard. Retiring is nowhere in the Bible to be found. God expects us to work from then on, you know. And I often tell people I retired back in 2010. I say I retired, I shut my companies down. I think I work more now, to be honest with you, than I did then. Or it seems like it. Maybe it's just my age, I don't know. But the point I'm trying to bring across today is, guys, is it can be done. Wanda and I started over in our 60s, bought a new piece of property, built a new camp house, rebuilding high tunnels, built shops and barns and putting up fencing, clearing land, building ponds and cutting hay. And we started over in our 60s doing that. It is possible. It is possible. And it has been a joy. Now, do I work my fool self to death? Yes, I do. But you know what? I love every minute of it. And our young people today, I don't know if they'll ever have this opportunity. It breaks my heart. We look at our own families today, and we don't even see anything in our own families that says that any of our grandchildren would even be interested in anything we've done here. And that breaks my heart, you know. But it's because society has moved our younger generation into a particular direction, away from the home, away from the land, away from family and stuff like that, and has everybody scattered everywhere. And the family has been broken down. And that's a tragedy. So, with that being said, guys, I'm going to get off of here today. And I do hope and pray that you guys can find inner peace wherever you're at, whether you live in town or whether you live in the country. Because, you know, let me tell you something. Go to Deuteronomy and look at the blessings of obedience. And look at what the Lord says in that. That's one thing that I had to come to grips with, was what the Lord said in the blessings of obedience. When you're obedient to God, He said, I'll bless you in the country. I'm going to paraphrase it. I'll bless you in the country. I'll bless you in the city. In other words, I'm going to bless you if you're obedient. It doesn't matter where you're at. And guys, today, it doesn't matter where you're at. If you're content where you're at, and you're happy, and God has given you peace, and you are within His will, then enjoy the simpler side of life and not fret and worry about what you don't have. Thank God for what you do have and move forward. Thank you guys from Deep South Homestead.